Caleb Calhoun here with Heather Dinich of ESPN. Heather, this is Caleb Calhoun, Off the Hook Sports. Thanks for doing this.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the college football playoff. I spoke with Bill Hancock earlier and this year, and it's obviously expanding to 12 teams. But we wanted to talk about something you spoke about earlier in the week, which is the SEC versus the Big Ten. Who is more likely to have two teams in the college football playoff? Mm-hmm. Now, I would believe the SEC because it's tougher, but don't you think the Big Ten, because it's so top-heavy, is actually a little more likely?
So the reason I say the SEC instead of the Big Ten is because Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State are all in the Big Ten's East Division. So somebody there is going to have a really hard time surviving and getting into the playoff as the second team, whereas in the SEC, you can have Georgia winning the East. Then in the West, you've got Alabama and LSU. We'll start there, right? Alabama plays Texas. LSU plays Florida State. Both of those teams can have a win against another Power 5 conference champion because Texas can win the Big 12. Florida State can win the ACC. So let's say Georgia wins the SEC. Alabama's sitting there with one loss and a win against a Texas team that wins the Big 12. LSU's sitting there with a loss to Alabama, but a win against the ACC champion, Florida State. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, no, I see exactly where you're going.
Because you're going to have Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State win the East, probably win the Big Ten. The runner-up in that league doesn't win their division. There could be a wonky three-way tie, obviously, but it's going to be much harder for that second Big Ten East team to join the winner.
Yeah, what totally shocked me was you had the SEC at above a 50% chance of squeezing in two teams, I think.
Well, and they've also done it before. This isn't making college football history. Georgia three-peating is making college football history. The SEC getting two teams in, that's like yesterday's news.
Yes, and with the 14 playoff, okay, here's the crazy part.
Yeah.
Could the SEC get three in?
So, yeah, if you have Georgia winning, it all hinges on Georgia, in my opinion. Because if Georgia loses to Tennessee and doesn't win the East, you could potentially eliminate the entire East if Tennessee doesn't win the SEC. I mean, think about that. Tennessee beats Georgia, goes to play in the SEC championship, loses. Do they take Alabama and Tennessee? Maybe. There's a really good chance. Or they could take Alabama and LSU. It all depends on what some of those other Power 5 conference champions do, I think.
How far behind Georgia do you think Tennessee is right now? Because we know last year that was a 27-13 game, and it really was a 45-0 game if Georgia wanted it to be. Do you think Tennessee could, being at Neyland, even though Georgia is still more talented, could actually make that game a little more competitive, or then they have a case to sell?
I do, and I expect it to be more competitive. If there is a team in the East that's going to trip up the Dogs, it's going to be Tennessee. I love what Josh Heupel's doing there. They have to be more prepared for that defense this year. That was the thing. I mean, they weren't ready for that, and I think this year they will be. I think they got to play better defense as well against those guys. So I do think it's possible, and it's funny because people have in their minds what's going to happen and think they know the way college football is going to play out. Marshall beat Notre Dame. People are like, why did that happen? Well, because they were 18 to 22 years old. I don't know. Maybe the quarterback broke up with his girlfriend that night. You just don't know what's going to happen in college football.
Or it's Notre Dame. I think they had midterms that week, and we know Notre Dame doesn't.
Maybe. Right.
What is there any – so, in 2 years when it goes to 12 teams, there's going to be the top 6 conference champions getting in. But I know they're supposed to technically prioritize conference champions. But is there really any seriousness to that this year, given how much ahead of everybody else I feel like the SEC and the Big Ten are?
So, in my opinion, if you win the SEC, you're going to finish in the top 4. Because in order to survive that and win that conference championship game, you're one of the best teams in the country. I think most people would agree with that. But I also feel like the 4-team set, or field rather, allows for the potential for Wisconsin with 3 losses to upset Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, and you still take Ohio State. Or it allows for last year, K-State, TCU. TCU was one hell of a team last year. Doesn't win the Big 12. They still put them in for reasons I can continue to explain. But there's a forgiveness there. And that goes back to the non-conference schedule that I was talking about, like with Texas and Florida State, with LSU and Alabama. So all those things matter.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just going to be it's going to be hard to sit there. I mean, my issue in 2 years is with the top 6 conference champions, given the fact that they already give priority to the conference champion, it's going to be hard for me to sit there and say the Pac-12 champion should have any sort of priority over like the 3rd or 4th team in the SEC or the 4th team in the Big Ten. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it depends on who it is. I mean, if USC is winning the Pac-12, they play Notre Dame, they play UCLA. Like, they have a legitimately difficult schedule. So I think it depends on the selection committee. Who did you beat? Like, it's not rocket science, and that matters a lot.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, next year when UCLA and USC aren't in the Pac-12,
oh right,
yeah,
then
I'm like, how is that conference going to have a serious champion that we could look at and say is one of the 12 best teams in the country
next year? Yeah, no, you're right. What's left? So Oregon, Dan Lanning and Bo Nix. Well, Bo probably won't be there next year, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. They're still going to have. They'll leave when the college football playoff expands to 12 teams. So as long as the Pac-12 champion is one of the 6 highest ranked teams, they're in.
Yeah, it makes Power 5 almost irrelevant at that point.
That's true.
Heather, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. I know you got to get back, but thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure.
With Kayla Calhoun with Off the Hook Sports, this has been Heather Dinich of ESPN.